Hello. Hi, everybody. How's it going? I'm Mustafa Asnain. I'm the CEO of Grant Assistant. Extremely excited to be here. I've always kind of looked out from the outside, looking at some of these events. So it's really nice to be over here and up here, and especially talking a little bit about the innovation competition, because innovation and inclusion, as some of my friends say, I think one of the most important things that we can do in the space that we are in, and make it easier and more accessible for organizations, for smaller organizations, for folks on the ground to actually win, to come up with their great ideas and actually put them out and make them accessible, for the work that we do and work with them. So so I'm actually really excited to announce some really interesting, some really exciting projects, some really exciting innovations really that have won with popular support. The judges' vote goes to plant-based malnutrition treatment by power of nutrition. Round of applause for these guys. And we can't deny the popular vote, because of course we all know how important the popular vote is. And the popular vote goes to solar PV chargers, battery swapping stations for gig drivers in Sri Lanka. I drive an EV myself, so I'm going to be looking into that. But thank you so much. Thank you so much for letting me come over here and talk about some of these innovations. And I'm excited and hoping to see more of you, over time as well. Thank you so much.
So good afternoon, everybody. It's been a wonderful day. I feel very energized by the panels that I listened to and the conversations that I've had with all of you in the networking. So thank you all for hanging in with us through a long and very full day. Just to reintroduce myself to those of you who may not have been here this morning, my name is Wade Warren. I'm the Chief Strategy Officer for International Development at Deloitte, and I'm the chair of the U.S. chapter of the Society for International Development. So I am very excited about the panel that we're about to have. You all can come on and take your seats if you want. Where's Alice? I would be more excited if the panelists were here. Let me tell you a little bit about this panel. We wanted to have an important plenary here at the end of the day to feature the Millennium Challenge Corporation, which we have not spent a whole lot of time talking about today. And we're going to have a fireside chat with Chizi Igwe and with Alice Albright, who's the CEO of the Millennium Challenge Corporation. So let me tell you just a little bit about them. I'll start with Chizi. Chizi is a hardworking and much appreciated member of the SID-US board. She started out leading our youth working group, then she became a member of the board, then she became the chair of the programs committee, and so we're just so delighted for everything you do at SID. She is also She's also a senior associate for corporate social responsibility at JPMorgan Chase, where she helps to develop programs that drive inclusive economic growth in the neighborhoods and cities and countries where JPMorgan Chase serves. Before that, she worked at Dahlberg Associates. She was with the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. She's a proud child of immigrant parents and has a master's degree in international business from the University of International Business and Economics in Beijing, China. So thank you, Chizi. Alice, you don't need much of an introduction to folks in this room. People know who you are, and we're so delighted that you could be with us today. If you don't know, Alice Albright is the CEO of the Millennium Challenge Corporation. She's been working in our field in international development for more than 30 years in the private sector, the nonprofit sector, the for-profit sector. She has been the lead of the Global Partnership for Education. She was Executive Vice President and Chief Operating Officer of the Exim Bank, and by happenstance also worked at JPMorgan. So the two of you have that in common. We're really delighted that you could both be with us, and I'll turn the microphone over to the two of you. Thank you.
Thank you,
Thank
Wade.
you, Wade. Can you all hear us? Okay. Well, good afternoon. I hope you all have enjoyed the conference so far. I've had the chance to walk around and pop in and out of sessions, and there's a lot of good energy. So hopefully we're going to bring that energy to this conversation, and I'm very excited to be on the stage sharing it with Alice. We're going to spend about 20 to 30 minutes talking about MCC's legacy and history and where the agency is going in the future. And so to start things off on a celebratory note, I hear congratulations in order. Happy 20th anniversary to your agency.
Yes.
So MCC was signed into law about 2 decades ago with a unique model to address global poverty through economic development. And since then has, and correct me if I'm wrong, invested over about $17 billion across 78 projects in upwards of 47 countries. Is that right?
You got it.
Can we give a round of applause? That is no small feat. And Wade shared with me earlier that you've been on a bit of a world tour, giving speeches, talking about MCC's history and MCC at 20. And I'm wondering, as you've reflected and thought about the last 20 years and the 20 years to come and beyond, and thought about MCC's challenges and their triumphs, what excites you most about the next 20 years and what MCC can do?
Well, Chizi, thank you for the question. And before I give a few thoughts, let me thank everybody at SID. It's wonderful to be here. I understand you all have 1,500 people here and 1,500 people online. And this is the first time you're not been able to well, you've outgrown, I should say, the Ronald Reagan building. So congratulations, and it really is, even though I'm sure everyone in the room is facing their challenges of various kinds, it is an enormous moment of joy to be with all of you and really talking about all the things that we all care so much about. So yes, MCC, we call it MCC at 20, so you got that right. And we celebrated our actual birthday on January 23rd, 2024 with a great party. But the moment is a very important moment for us. And we've been spending time looking backwards at what has really made the agency special and keeps the agency special.
Right.
But also, particularly given the challenges that we are facing now, are always asking ourselves, what is the value added that we have and why does it matter so much right now? So the things that are really special about the agency is that we are highly selective in who we work. We work with countries that are emerging democracies. We are a grant maker. We do not give loans. That is very special and special right now. When we work with a country that has become eligible, we go big and we go deep. So the size of the grants that we give for the countries that we're entering into compacts with is $300, $400, sometimes $500 million. Very few aid agencies in the world are providing grant funding of that magnitude.
Right.
What is at our heart is that we are a compact. We are an agreement. We are an arrangement between ourselves as the United States with a partner nation around the concept of reform, investing in bringing down the barriers to growth and creating opportunity for people, and looking at where particular parts of a society are not included. And that whole construct of a compact, and we actually have a big program called a compact and a smaller program called a threshold, has really stood the test of time. And you are very right in citing the figures. We've deployed over $17 billion in 78 compacts and thresholds in 47 countries and in multiple sectors, multiple sectors. So we are very proud of the track record that the agency working very closely with our partner countries, has put together. What's very interesting is asking the question, how fit for purpose is the model for what is ahead of us? And the answer is very. Obviously, being a grant maker makes a big difference. I'm sure many of you are talking about, people have different words for it. We call it locally led development. I know USAID is working very much on localization. Our business model is premised on working closely with countries. Countries are involved from the very beginning in our analytical processes, and then we set up an entity in the country to actually implement the work. So we have been working very much in a locally led way since the very beginning.
Right.
And we're also, and this is the final point I make on this, we're very adaptable. So if you look at the range of things that we're working on at any one time, it is a reflection of what the countries have deemed that they need to overcome their particular challenges towards economic growth. So we continuously adapt in the types of sectors that we're working on. So we're very well suited to be addressing issues of climate, issues of preparedness, issues of 20th century skills, for example, which are some of the things that we expect to be, and we know are going to be very hot topics going forward.
And you mentioned localization, which was it has been a hot topic across a number of our breakouts and our sessions. I'm curious, as MCC looks at the 20 years above going forward, and we think about innovations in how you work with partners to really deepen partner-led engagement, what sticks out to you the most?
Well, we have a pretty strong business model around this already that is really at the core of what we have going on, but we continue to refine it. Okay. And we have a group right now that's internally that's working on making sure that we are leaning into this as much as possible. So there's a lot of questions about how we operate that we're continuing to face. Are we doing this enough?
Okay.
One of the things, and this is a slightly nitty-gritty topic, but one of the things that we're working on that's innovative is streamlining some of our internal procedures around procurement and who's got responsibility for what. One of the things that I do know is that we have a bit of a reputation for perhaps being a bit hard to work with. We know that challenge is our middle name. So we're trying to, I know, challenge is our middle name. We can be a bit challenging sometimes, but we are trying to streamline some of our procurement efforts and trying to be a little bit easier to work with. So there's innovations of all kinds to try to make us fit for the moment that we're in.
That's helpful. And talking about the moment, politically in this country, we are at a very interesting moment, and particularly when it comes to our views on the U.S.'s role in foreign aid, how much, when to give, what to give. And I know that MCC has recently proposed some legislation that would help expand the country candidate pool. And I'm curious, and I think a number of our audience is curious about that legislation, and also our strategy, or MCC strategy, about working with Congress, a Congress who may not understand the need for foreign aid and the critical role agencies like MCC play. So can you talk about the strategy to work with Congress around MCC's engagement around the world?
Sure. Well, let me back up for a second and ask the question, what is the rationale behind the legislation? And you're absolutely right about the legislation. We are seeking a reform of our candidate pool that would add, right now we can work with, using the World Bank's classifications, low income or lower middle income countries, and we're seeking, that's about 80, 81, and we're seeking to add the lower range of the upper middle income countries, which should take us up to about 112. And the reason for that is that poverty, and really inequity within poverty, exists in many more countries than the 80, 81 that we can work with right now. So there is pressing need. So the first piece of the discussion is around need, and we all know that we have an enormous amount of work ahead of us. So that's really the driver for it. We are making very good progress with Congress in having discussions about it, and that is very gratifying to us. And what we have to keep doing is forging the consensus politically. It is a very different political environment from when we were created, around U.S. leadership and international aid. And this gets back a little bit to our business model. So we're all about helping democracies thrive, helping democracies deliver, doing it in a very transparent, data-driven and accountable way, working very closely with countries, and working on critical issues of both institutional reform, but then also helping countries with critical infrastructure and needs that they have. So that need is as true now as it was 20 years ago when we were started. And the more that we talk to people up on the Hill, they absolutely agree with that. Now, on the budget, this will not be a surprise to anybody. I think the overall amount of money going into foreign aid ought to go up. You all know better than I do that there is a misperception that 25, 20, 30% of the U.S. budget goes into foreign aid, foreign assistance, et cetera. It's, as you all know just as well as I do, it's around, it's 1, if not less than 1%. So it's tiny. And I think that given, the lens that we look through, given all the wonderful things that we could be working on with countries, we should be leaning into that. And so, there's many, many examples of that. Countries want technology, they want healthcare, they want different ways of approaching education, they want climate solutions. I mean, the list goes on and on and on.
I couldn't agree more. And you spoke about, as you've engaged Congress, they are understanding the need for continued engagement, if not scaled engagement. When we think about the landscape outside of our borders and the partners we work with, our potential partners who may see the U.S.'s role differently or who are now faced with a greater number of opportunities or avenues to fund projects back home, how do we think about that evolving nature of our partners and their context, and how does MCC fit in as options become more plentiful for capital?
Well, you're absolutely right. Countries have options, and one of the reasons why countries are increasingly indebted is that a lot of those options tend to be debt. So that's one of the distinguishing features of MCC is that, as I've said, we are a grant. Countries also want very much to be in the driver's seat about choosing the priorities that they work on, and that's one thing about our business model that we think is very appealing. We start, once a country is selected, we start with something called a constraints to growth analysis, which is what it sounds like. It's working with countries very closely as partners to dig into what are the main challenges on the road towards prosperity and economic growth. And then the countries choose what, of the things that emerge, the countries choose what they want to work with. And so right from the very beginning of how we work with countries, countries have the ability to choose what they want to do and determine what they want to invest in using MCC funding. And that is, first of all, we think that that's the right approach for long-term, sustainable, and country-owned development. And it's something that I think is absolutely the right way to go in terms of the relationships that our agency is looking to build with countries. And also how we, doing our part, are working on U.S. relationships and U.S. leadership.
And as we think about a potential expansion of the countries in which MCC can work with, does that change at all the model that has MCC has become known for and that has led to success in your 20 years of existence? How does that change and evolve as you may bring in new countries into the fold?
It will, if the legislation is passed, and we certainly hope that it will be.
Fingers crossed.
Fingers crossed, exactly. It will add more countries from whom we could select if they pass our scorecard. So more countries would be scored by our scorecard, which many of you may be familiar with, but it in and of itself is a very strongly incentivizing aspect of how we work. But the core aspect of how we work, and this is really important, will not change.
Okay.
Every country will be scored. We will start, we will pay a lot of attention to the core features of what constitutes eligibility. And the big one is being on a democratic trajectory, and also countries that are trying to fight corruption. If you look at our scorecard, you can tell exactly what the eligibility requirements are. But we have a very sort of intuitive, linear business model. Constraints to growth, we figure out once a country then chooses what it is, what are what we call the root causes of the constraints, so what are really the challenges. We then start designing programs. We then work to set up a local entity, and then they become responsible for implementation. Once we start implementing, everything has to be done within 5 years, and then we do a lot of evaluation work to see what we can learn to do it better next time. So that, what I just said, that will not change.
Okay.
But what will change is that we will have more countries to score. We will then start getting into discussions with those countries about what areas of reform they may need to undertake if they're interested in working with MCC. We'll be able to probably broaden our footprint in Central and Latin America. There'll be some additional countries in Eastern Europe and the Balkans and the Caucasus, a few more in Southern Africa, and a few more in the Pacific. And I'm confident that we could be in a position to do some terrific work there, but there are also areas that are very important to the U.S. strategically.
Okay. I want to turn things a bit to something that's of personal importance to you. So education is one of the sectors that MCC works in, but also a sector that's important to you. And as you think about both your reflection on your work in education and MCC's work across that sector in the 20 years, what are the trends and outlooks that MCC is focused on in education in the next 20 years and beyond?
Well, it's a great question, and right now we've got some really interesting education programs that are sort of, as works in progress, as I like to say.
Okay.
So if I were to generalize, a couple of points. First of all, education is absolutely a driver of economic growth, and you see that in terms of the connections between better educated people, numeracy, literacy skills, digital skills, but also the skill sets that the private sector is asking of a workforce in order to fulfill job opportunities. So there are lots of linkages between different levels of education and economic growth. We are increasingly getting asked to work on things that will help countries prepare for the 21st century. So it's digital literacy, and it's a skills-based approach. And it's a slightly different focus from the work that I've done previously, so it's complementary.
Okay.
But countries are really interested in making sure that they've got a workforce that is prepared for the future. And many of the countries that we work in, and all of you will who are here as well, have rapid population growth, and the countries are getting younger and younger and younger in terms of the demographics of the population. So education is a pressing need for many countries that we are now meeting with.
I couldn't agree more. And then Alice, as we think about both the countries Kenneth Pool you work with now, your agency works with, and the potential expansion, one question that comes to mind is, as you approach these countries, you mentioned that locally led development and implementation is MCC's kind of bread and butter. How do we think about MCC's role in advancing equity with the partners you work with? And I think even before that, how would you define equity when we talk about global poverty reduction, when we talk about development? What does equity mean in that context? And what is your agency's role in furthering that?
Well, it's a great question, and one that touches on a lot of what we just talked about. So very simply put, for us, equity means not leaving people out.
Okay.
And when you think about what is the connection between that and economic growth, you cannot foresee a country successfully growing and leaving huge parts of the population out. So we are continuing to refine for us internally what we call our gender and social inclusion strategy and policy. And so with this process that I've outlined at the very beginning of it, we start studying where are the issues of exclusion. Is it women? Is it certain rural communities? Is it certain ethnic minorities within a country? What is it? And then we take a very sort of systemic look at it. Why are people being excluded? Is it something to do with geography? Is it something to do with the legal framework? What is it exactly? And then we start figuring out how can we work. Well, we also do a lot of consultation with different groups locally to make sure that we're really understanding it well. That is a critical part of how we work. And then we start weaving in those systemic solutions into the work that we do. So let me make it real by giving you just a very real recent example. So we A couple of years ago, we signed a $300 million compact with Lesotho, which is to work in the horticulture sector. But in working with the country and really understanding it all, what became clear to us was that, that the fact that women could not inherit land from their deceased husbands was really going to stand in the way of women being able to own the land and then use it to, as collateral to finance the scaling up of their horticulture business.
Right.
So after a lot of very close work with local, local parties, local civil society organizations, people from the traditional communities, after a lot of work with a lot of people locally, the laws have now been changed. And so women can inherit land in Lesotho, and that will be a fundamental change towards giving them a better opportunity in this critical part of the Lesotho economy. That's an example of how we take a very systems-based approach to looking at issues of gender and social inclusion. So it matters, it's the right thing to do for so many reasons. It matters purely for the rationale of equity. It also matters for democracy, more people able to vote and participate and understand and contribute to the dialogue, and it certainly matters for economic growth.
Absolutely. And I wanted to close out with one question. You mentioned at the top of your remarks that MCC's main vehicle for investment is a compact, so working in partnership with partner countries to figure out the pressing needs and how to address them. I'm curious, as we look at 20 years forward and bringing at JPMorgan, we talk a lot about the full force of the bank, bringing in our different parts to address our customers' needs. I wonder when we think about the U.S. government and bringing the full force of our government to support poverty reduction, how MCC thinks about, as we move forward, working alongside other agencies to help partner countries get the best of the best of the best the U.S. can offer in terms of helping them meet their development needs that they've identified as pressing for them. What does that look like in MCC's 20-year trajectory and beyond?
Well, we have very good relationships with all the other development tools, USAID, now the DFC, and we're in regular contact with them. We're also in very close contact with our friends at State. And there's a lot of information that we share together to try to be complementary. The tools themselves are quite complementary. We've got an arrangement with the DFC, for example, where we try to co-finance in certain countries. So if, we have to take, I'm not gonna say if, we must take a whole of government approach here in the US if we're gonna be successful in really making inroads and working around the whole international development challenge. So we must. Now, it goes beyond that. We need to work with all of you. I know that SID is a great gathering of many people from many different parts of our community, private sector, foundations, NGOs, a lot of folks. We need to work with all of you too, because you will all have something to offer, whether or not it's working with us directly, working at, providing us information through consultations, comparing notes. What do we know about this? What are good ideas about that? So you all are a critical part of what I'll call the whole of government approach. And then, many of you will be familiar with the billions to trillions agenda. That is also going to have to involve the private sector.
Right.
So I'm going to put you all into the whole of approach too. And I think that one thing that's a real opportunity for the American environment is because we have such richness and depth in our capital markets, in our foundation world, in the types of government tools that we have. If you begin to stitch it all together, the U.S. can make a powerful contribution in international development.
Absolutely, and I will relay the message to Jamie. Our conference theme this year is a spark of hope. And so to close, I'd love if you could share with the audience and our guests one thing that is exciting you or is making you hopeful about the U.S.'s future in terms of our engagement abroad or our engagement with partners who are working their very best to create an environment where their citizens can thrive. What is one thing that you can leave us with?
Sure. So I can imagine that in reading the headlines, listening to the news, et cetera, that, there may be a bit of a glumness that is set in at the moment. When you look at Ukraine, you look at the Middle East, you look at budget situations, you name it. It is a difficult moment, and we would be short-sighted if we weren't acknowledging that. But what gives me hope, and I actually have experience with it, is that it is difficult moments that spark opportunity and spark people leaning in, and spark, great moments of innovation. And the U.S. is really good at innovation and really good at making the best of those moments. So I'm going to give you 3 examples of that that I've been part of in my career. So a long time ago, I was working in banking. I was with JPMorgan for a while, but even before that, I was working in banking early on when there was the Latin American debt crisis, and people thought that the ceiling was falling and the world would never be the same. But what came out of that was a series of transactions called debt equity swaps, where you took defaulted debt and you bought it at 30 cents on the dollar, 20 cents on the dollar, and you turned it into equity to start investing in companies in those areas that had defaulted. That then became what is now emerging markets, which is a whole, sometimes successful, sometimes less so, but a whole asset class onto its own. So you could argue that over that whole period, that very difficult moment during those initial defaults was a very difficult moment, but it led to something really interesting. Then in the early 2000s, I worked at Gavi, and we were perplexed by how do you get vaccines to countries in the developing world that didn't have access to those. So we put together a whole entity to do that, and it is now, along with the Global Fund, become very, very successful. I remember when I was at GPE in March 2020, when we had to go home and work from our homes, and the sky was falling because of COVID. COVID was not only a health crisis, it was very immediately an education crisis. Because the only public policy tool that not only our government, but governments around the world had to curtail the spread of COVID was to shut schools, which has obvious ramifications for education. So what we did at GPE was we looked at our financing contracts and how we were doing our financing, and we put together, it became $500 million, but it was $250 million, and then another $250 million. We put together a $500 million window to give all the countries that we worked with at GPE a $5 to $7 million grant to enable them to do education on a distance basis through radio networks. That's something that was not ideal, but we did it. And we gave it, I think about 60 or 70 countries got grants. And we did it because we had to do it. It was the only way to keep education going. So those are small little examples, but the U.S. is really good at innovating, and I am absolutely confident that what will come out of the difficult period that we have now is a renewed understanding of how critical this work is, a renewed desire to form the best partnerships that we can and make the best of what we have and go offer it to the country partners that we have. So I'm very optimistic. We just have a lot of work to do.
We do, but we're in the right place with the right people. And Alice, I know it's been a very busy week for you and a busy year as you celebrated the anniversary. So thank you for taking time to come join us at the conference. I hope that you all enjoyed the conversation. I hope you get some rest this weekend. And I hope you all stay for the rest of our closing plenary. Thank you so much, Alice.
Chizi, thank you. Thank you very much.
What a great discussion and what an excellent day this has been. I'm sure that, like me, you've got a moment, a thought, an idea that has come out of the last few hours that you're going to take away with you. My name is Mark Castellino, and I serve as the Senior Vice President for Government Services at Opportunity International. We are thrilled to be a Diamond Level sponsor of the SID-US annual conference. We really value the work that SID does, whether it's these annual conferences or the fantastic annual dinners, or of course the work groups where so much of our interaction, dialogue and ideas happen. And so I know that firsthand as having served as the co-chair of the Food Security and Agriculture Work Group. And so there are so many fantastic things that SID does, and we really appreciate all of those things. I really look forward to the next session. It's our closing one, and we're going to talk about the Foreign Assistance Act. The Foreign Assistance Act resonates with what all of us, I think, do at this conference. And I'm quoting from the language of the Act here: the encouragement and sustained support of the people of developing countries in their efforts to acquire the knowledge and resources essential to the development and to build the economic, political, and social institutions. I know at Opportunity International, these ideas have animated the work that we've done for the last 52 years. And I'm sure that for many of you in this room and your organizations, it resonates in a similar way. While the purpose of the Act has remained the same, the way that USAID achieves it over the years has evolved, and we have evolved together with it. For us at Opportunity International, that evolution looked like us partnering with USAID in the late 90s and early 2000s to implement microcredit projects. And then it moved on to working with the Global Development Alliance to capitalize fledgling financial institutions, and then to utilizing USAID's Development Credit Authority to de-risk lending to smallholder farmers, and now to working to help USAID implement some of their newest strategies around driving private capital into the education sector to improve our education outcomes. And I'm sure that the same is the case for many of you who've worked with USAID over the past few years. You've grown and evolved as well with them. So I'm looking forward to hearing from this excellent panel on how USAID is responding to the global development challenges we are confronted with today in new and even more impactful ways. There's perhaps no better person to kick off this session than Dennis Vega. At his swearing-in ceremony as Chief of Staff of USAID, Administrator Power said of Dennis, "You are the leader that I need, that this agency needs, that this administration needs, that the people out there in the world need to help meet this moment." Well, given the last 2 years, Dennis might be forgiven for wondering whether the administrator undersold the job to him, because we've experienced some of the most challenging global situations: geopolitical, environmental, social. As a key member of the leadership team, Dennis has been at the forefront of the agency's responses to all of these issues and many more. Despite the challenges, Dennis obviously sees those sparks of hope that we've been talking about over the last few hours. Because, hot off the press, I can tell you that as of Monday, Dennis will be stepping into the USAID Deputy Assistant Administrator role. So it's my pleasure to welcome Chief of Staff Vega to share some insights from his tenure so far and to help us frame this final discussion today.
Thanks, Mark, and thanks, everyone. It's good to see everyone. I will be very short because I know that we are keeping you all from the reception, so I don't want to be too long. I'm sure that y'all talked about this a lot, but we're all dealing with three realities right now in the world. The first is really that development challenges are outpacing our ability to meet them from a resource standpoint, and from a people standpoint. And really, we're in a situation where, the problems are bigger than any government, one government or any entity can really deal with. The second is that new technologies are really gonna force a change in how society functions, and we, as a development community, have to adapt to that change. And the third, and the one that I feel most in my day-to-day, is really that development issues and development challenges are increasingly becoming core to our geopolitical issues and the foreign policy priorities of our administration and more broadly across the world. That's really forcing us to think about how we at USAID can do our work differently and how we can work in a way that meets those challenges. And that's where our approach really around progress beyond programs really started. This idea that we have to think beyond our programmatic efforts and think about how we can catalyze change. We're doing that in 3 ways. We're really focused on how can we be that catalyst in the world, and how can we bring more resources into the work that we're doing and work with different partners. And we look at how we can really invest with private sector more and use that as a catalyst for our work. We've had a lot of real challenges in that space. We don't have the capacity right now to engage with private sector in the way that we need to. So we've done a lot of work over the last 2 years to build that capacity internally by establishing new processes and new policies, but also of really doing that hustle catalytic work with different private sectors. And we've increased our private sector engagement by over 60% during that time. So it's a big accomplishment for us. The second thing is really focusing on how we empower the communities we work with more and how we partner more locally. That is frankly where progress has been slow. I think it's no surprise to any of you that it takes a while to turn things around in government. Our processes are long and take a long time to really bring change. But we have seen progress in the amount of partners that we're working with locally, and then also in a culture change where people are really starting to work with local partners and bringing them in early on in our programmatic development and then also in our policy development. The second thing we're really focused on is how can we get more money, get better bang for our buck, and that really is a focus on cost effectiveness and how can we make sure that we're having the most impact by dollar spent. That's why we created the Office of the Chief Economist and really have worked with them to really increase our programmatic effectiveness. Over the last year, our Office of Chief Economist has worked with our missions and with our bureaus to affect that positive change in over $900 million worth of contracts and grants. And the last thing, and what's necessary for all of this, is to really build a strong workforce. So we've worked across all of our agency to bring equity to our workforce and really work at how do we incorporate our contractors better, how do we give benefits to all of our workers, and then how do we modernize the Foreign Service to meet the needs that we have today. The last part of that is really how do we value our Foreign Service nationals. So we've done a lot of work through our Foreign Service National Empowerment to really focus on how can we make them better leaders within our mission and value them in the way that we need to. That's really what we've been trying to do. There's a lot of work to be done. You'll hear from my colleagues about that work, but for us, it really is a focus on how can we deliver the impact together as a community that we need to over the next few years. So thank you. I hope you all had a great day today, and I'm looking forward to hearing from my colleagues as well. So thank y'all.
Welcome. Yeah, as you get settled in, I want to tell you a little story. This morning, when Catherine Rafelson called us all together for the opening ceremony, she said that she had asked ChatGPT to describe the panelists, and she was told that we were going to be radiant and celestial. So
I was going to say it was you.
So I just wanted to put that out there so that you know what the expectation is. So I will welcome everybody. This is our last panel of the day. We're the only thing standing between you and the happy hour. But we thought it was really important to pull together a group of senior officials from USAID to hear about some of the important issues that you all are grappling with. Their bios are in your agenda, in your program, but I'll just introduce them quickly. All three of them are friends of mine. We've worked together for years, and I'm really happy that you're here. Matt Nims is Deputy Assistant to the Administrator in the Bureau for Humanitarian Assistance. He is a longtime fixture at USAID. He's worked there for 28 years in emergency programming. I don't think it's an exaggeration to say that he is one of the world's leading experts on food aid. So thank you, Matt, for being with us. He also did Peace Corps in Dominican Republic, so good on you. Cheryl Stumbras is the Senior Deputy Assistant Administrator in the Bureau for Inclusive Growth, Partnerships, and Innovation. She's a Senior Foreign Service Officer. She has served all over the world, including as Mission Director in USAID Zambia. And she has particular expertise in democracy, human rights, and governance. She was Peace Corps in Botswana. Okay. And then Michelle Sumilis is Assistant Administrator in the Bureau for Planning, Learning, and Resource Management. She has been in and out of USAID a couple of times. She was under the Obama administration. She was Chief of Staff at the agency. She's worked for Bread for the World. She worked for the House Subcommittee on State and Foreign Operations, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, and the Global Health Council. And did not go to the Peace Corps. Same with me. Good. So I want to get right into things, and I mentioned your bureaus. I don't know if all those things are meaningful to everybody in the audience. So just kind of as a way of level setting, I wanted to ask you to describe a little more about the bureaus and what you do there, especially because the agency has just undergone a reorganization, and a couple of you are in bureaus that have been reconfigured to some extent. So I'll start with you, Cheryl. You're the head of the new Bureau for Inclusive Growth, Partnerships, and Innovation, IPI.
Right.
So tell us, it has a very broad mandate, I know. Tell us briefly sort of what areas you cover.
Great. Well, first of all, thanks for having us here today. It's great to be here, and thanks for your long commitment to international development. We're really grateful for all your work. So indeed, the Bureau for Inclusive Growth, Partnerships, and Innovation, or IPI, just became operational last October, actually. And our mandate really is to provide thought leadership and technical assistance that catalyzes inclusive growth, expands partnerships, and generates innovative solution to the complex development challenges that we are facing today, and really seeks to ensure that USAID missions can do those exact same things by building their capacity. We do work on a bunch of key priorities for the agency, gender equality, inclusive development, expanding private sector engagement. We also are the Center of Excellence for Education and Economic Growth, and also we do innovation, technology, and digital transformation. Just that.
Okay. So I actually wanted to probe that a little more because that's a lot of things, right? You mentioned education, gender, localization, public-private engagement, digital access. How do you, as the leader of that bureau, bring all those disparate disciplines together so that they're greater than the sum of their parts, and also so that you can help the folks in the field do their work more effectively?
It is true. It is really a diverse bureau. There's two centers, Center for Education and Center for Economic Growth, Economic and Market Development. And then there are 5 hubs that do cross-cutting integrated priorities of the agency. We definitely realize the interconnectivity between the hubs and the centers. And really our focus is on making sure that the missions get the services they need. And we really believe that we provide better services when we integrate the expertise across the centers and hubs. I would say, though, we don't try to integrate everything for a mission. We really try to be very demand-driven and tailor what support we provide to missions and what training we offer based on the specific needs and the context of that country. But across the Bureau, I would say we're really trying to do 3 things. One, we're trying to streamline, strengthen, and modernize our approach. That includes more traditional technical assistance that we provide to missions. It also is a lot of training. You know, missions have digital, gender, localization, inclusive development advisors, in addition to education officers and economic growth officers, that we provide a wide array of training and capacity building for. But one thing I think is very different or more modern in what we do is we're trying to take a lead in making sure the systems are in place for these officers to thrive. And just to give one example, I think our private sector engagement work, which we call PSE Modernize, is really a great example. We're working on 7 core reforms that really seek to flip the way USAID does private sector engagement, because we know we have to exponentially increase what we're doing in that area to be successful. So we're really trying to figure out all the things that a mission would need so their officers actually become really capable and comfortable engaging the private sector. And one thing I would mention for this group particularly is we've just launched the corporate partnering portal. So one of the things we've learned is that it won't surprise this audience, but sometimes USAID has a bad habit of speaking to people in acronyms or in development lexicon rather than meeting people where they are. So this portal really is looking at engaging the private sector by speaking their language and making sure we come to the table to talk to them. So that is a real big switch of what we're trying to do. Second, to your question of how are we greater to the sum of our parts? Again, we are very clear on trying to be tailored to respond to needs, but if I could give one example of that, it really would be the Women in Digital Economy Fund. We've just started this new Women in Digital Economy Fund that really is trying to get to the point of how do we make sure that women and girls have better access to the internet and access to digital technology that's secure and really meets their needs. So we created this digital technology, Women in the Digital Economy Fund. We put in a small investment and raised $70 million by other private sector investments. And then we also created the Women in the Digital Economy Initiative and actually received $700 million in commitments to work on closing the digital gender divide. So this program will hope to really take a big bite out of that gender divide by, in part, providing over 63 million jobs to women in 60 different digital companies in 77 different countries. So for us, that is the whole pot of IPI, so to speak. It's gender equity, it's digital, it's education, it's localization, it's private sector engagement with philanthropic and as well as private sector investment. And I think I forgot one of them. Employment creation, that's the last one. So we're trying to look at all these pieces and how we do programming to really have more impact. We also think that more integrated programs where we really focus on leveraging will really get to that idea of having progress beyond USAID's programs. And then lastly, I would say, I'm going to talk faster. Lastly, I would say we're really focused on leveraging, and we want people to see IPI and think that is a bureau that really works on leveraging. So I talked a little bit about leveraging private sector investment, but we also want to leverage innovation and technology and leverage the collaboration we have with other agencies like MCC, you just heard from Alice Albright, and the DFC, the Development and Finance Corporation. So on the innovation front, for example, we have a Development Innovations Initiative that looks at bringing scientists and researchers together to find the most cutting edge problems to what seem like intractable problems and find solutions. So that's a big focus. And we do in IPI, we have a dedicated unit that works with the DFC and MCC to better equip Administrator Power, who sits on those boards, to really advocate for development, focus investments in DFC, and to work on programs that more directly use DFC investments to achieve development objectives that USAID's trying to further. I better stop there.
That's great.
Might go on all day.
I know that's a great tour of your very broad mandate in your bureau. So thank you very much, Michelle. Let me turn to you next. Your bureau has recently been restructured a bit and renamed. It's now the Bureau for Planning, Learning, and Resource Management. Just so everybody here is clear, can you tell us sort of what your mandate is and what changed in the bureau?
So, well, thanks. First of all, thank you so much for staying so late on a Friday, and we will talk fast so you can all get to happy hour and socialize and network, which is, I know, what SID is all about. So thanks again for hosting us. And let me just say, the new Bureau, for many of you probably, it would be familiar if you remember what PPC did, right? And many of you are former PPC folks, including Gloria, who I'm so honored to have worked with. So a lot of what we do has stayed the same from when we were PPL. So we still are the home of the program cycle. I can use that buzzword here because everyone here knows it. So we are still the Bureau that looks at country strategies. We look at countries' evaluation policies and their plans. We look at their strategic activity design. We do all of that work. We are still also the Bureau that is responsible for development policy. So we are still, if you're looking for the agency that's working with IPI on the gender policy, we continue to do that. And then we continue to work with missions and bureaus to implement those policies. We also continue to serve as the Center for USAID's development diplomacy. So we're responsible for bilateral, multilateral, and now we have a new foundation hub where we're working with foundations. We're responsible for the OECD DAC relationship, for the relationship with the bank, and then we're also the hub for the G7 and the G20. So we're all still doing those things. What has come into our Bureau that's different from PPL, but similar to PPC, is the Budget Office. So the Budget Office is now integrated with us, and what we're trying to do is to say, okay, so if a country has decided we want to change our strategy and be different, how can the budget numbers reflect that change? How can that happen? It won't happen in 1 year, but it might happen in 2 or 3. Or if the front office or a leader is interested in starting a new initiative, how can we move resources towards that? Or how can we work with countries to integrate that in? We're working right now on gender, on digital. How can those things become part of what they're doing? So it's exciting. It is not all rainbows and unicorns every day, but we are learning how to work together and to bring all those key pieces together. And we also are helping to think about how can we have the greatest impact. I know later we're going to talk about resources. In the past, the learning, evaluation, and research pieces were not always linked to budget decisions. But now we're all in one bureau, and we're starting to think about how do we work with our Office of the Chief Economist on cost effectiveness, and how do we bring that evaluation and learning into the budget decision making. So it's a rubric that I think really can work and will work.
Good. I'm gonna get a little wonky here at the end of the day, and you know, I've obviously sort of followed the fortunes of the Policy Bureau and the budget at USAID over the years. So I think many of us in the development community were really pleased when the resource management piece of what the agency does was moved into your bureau so that there could be a union of sort of policy making and budgeting. But then we got a little confused when they took the word policy out of your name of your bureau and they created a separate Office of Policy in the agency. So could you tell us a little bit about why we shouldn't be confused, or what that Office of Policy does and how you all work together?
Sure, and I think, as I said before, PLR continues to be responsible for development policy. So we're working with IPI on the economic growth strategy. We're working with them on the digital strategy and implementation of things like the gender strategy. The Office of Policy was started in order to really think about new cross-cutting issues. As we all know, development's changing, right? We have new issues. We have issues of climate change, national security challenges like migration, pandemics, other things like that. And so as Administrator Power looked at our organization chart, she said there's not a group that is not continually engaged in the day-to-day that can kind of sit aside from all of that, much like SP does over at State Department, and think through these kinds of issues. Then that thinking then has to be integrated back into the agency. And so I think that's the virtuous cycle that I'm going to talk about. The Policy Office works first of all, it's led by Cindy Wong, who many of you probably know. She was at MCC, CGD, other places. She is lovely and really has taken to heart the fact that this needs to be really integrated into the agency. So she's establishing, and the way they work is they establish task teams. And those task teams think about specific issues. So I'll give you an example of how it works. They just started a task team on multilateral development bank reform. They started it about 8 months ago. That team is co-led by policy and by PLR because we actually are the home for the engagement with the World Bank. And so what that task team did is they went across the building, they went outside, they went inside the government and said, what are those things that should be development oriented, that should be part of MDB reform? We don't lead on MDB reform, that's Treasury's job, but we want to be able to feed into Treasury's process. They came up with a very long paper. It was great, it was 20 pages. I was like, thank God I didn't have to write that paper. But it really talked about how MDB reform could be different. And so we then worked through our channels to share that with Treasury, to share that with others. And now that task team is sunsetting because that whole work is coming back to PLR. We'll continue the relationship, we'll continue to hand that off and over. Another focus of our administrator, as you all probably know, is sustainable economic growth. And so we have an economic resilience initiative. The policy and PLR and IPI co-led a process to really think about what's the framework for that effort. And we're in the process right now of PLR working with IPI to take that framework and to fit that into country programs and plans. Policy's not integrating it in country programs and plans. They're asking us to help make that happen. And so it's really all of us working together to say, how do these new issues, new areas get woven back in? I think there is some overlap, but I think it really means that we just have to think about clearly where the lines are and how we work together. And it's people who can think about new issues. We're going to be talking about migration. They're going to be talking about artificial intelligence, which we'll talk about later. And they're doing some work on the HDP nexus to really help to think about how to move those forward. So we're trying to have clear lanes. I think that it will get blurry at times, but I think working together, we can work through all those things.
Right, that's really helpful. Matt, first I want to thank you. Sonali Corday, who's the brand new head of the Bureau of Humanitarian Assistance, was supposed to be with us this afternoon. She had to travel unexpectedly, and you stepped in on short notice, so we're grateful to you. Your bureau is charged with responding to natural disasters and complex crises around the world, of which there are many. I can't really get my head around how you all manage everything that you've got on your plates right now, but can you give us just a quick sort of overview of what you're grappling with?
Sure, and apologize on behalf of Sonali, and she was like, don't screw this up, but I was, you probably should have stayed, but when they need to go to Gaza, so I totally get it, and that's sort of what we do. So apology on behalf of Sonali for not being here, and sorry y'all stuck with me, but I'll try my best here. But it really is an honor to be here from the Bureau of Humanitarian Assistance. And again, talking about recent reorgs, even though it really was about 3 years ago, BHA did come into existence from our legacy kind of Food for Peace and OFTA things. And some of us, kind of at the front lines, a line that would never happen. But I actually stand here today to say we actually, 2.5+ years later, feel like we are starting to gel as actually the lead humanitarian coordinator for the U.S. government. And I'm damn proud to be sitting here to do exactly that, to be honest with you all. For those of you who don't know, our goal does remain the same: to alleviate suffering, save lives, and to get communities back on that emergency recovery path. And unfortunately, we're not winning. We, the humanitarian community, are not in the best place. And if we kind of look at a time frame, let's say a year before COVID, to now, we've had over double of the increase, upwards of 180 million people in need of not just regular aid, but like life-saving humanitarian need. So the arrow has gone very radically back the different way because, we can trace this back to COVID and some of those impacts, but we can also very much trace that to climate change on one very real level, in the sense of increased intensity of those natural disasters. And then let's just put it out there, the intensity and number of conflicts in the world has just changed the game again. And I do think, if I take my hat off a little bit and try to prophesize, I think we're probably going to need to look at this more greater in the humanitarian community to figure out how we're going to do some of these things differently, because we are in one of those, I think, pivotal moments where we're going to have to more radically think on that. And I would say, I think USAID And BHA and our partners here are actually incredibly well placed to be a leader in that discussion, and I can't wait for that to go forward, because I think it's going to need all of that very much. But again, that almost 180 million people in need in the world, we currently have 5 major crises that we're responding to right now. So those of you who know, we have disaster assistance response teams out in the field right now. Not even 4 or 5 years ago, we would do 2 or 3 at any given time. We just shut down 1, and so we're at 5. We actually had up to 7 going on at one time, and what that means is a huge amount of resources of people that we have fielded as well as in Washington to do this. And what it really means is all of you, all of the humanitarians and development partners out on the front lines who are just impacted greatly by this. And I should have started my talk about just the incredible gratitude from USAID, from BHA, for your teams out in the fields who are really, literally, when I say on the front line, it really does mean the front line. And it is an important aspect to remember. And please know that at USAID and in BHA, that is not lost at all. And our local squads on both sides that are really having to be, impacted so greatly, just a continual feeling of respect, and humbleness from our side that continues. And in places where we are rolling right now with the big responses of Haiti, in Ukraine, Gaza, Sudan, and I think Yemen kind of comes always to the list, and continues to be where we're doing a lot of our focus, where a lot of our crews are out there. But then like going into DRC, the Horn, other than the Horn, Ethiopia, are taking just huge amounts of time and resources as well. And so that continues to be something. And I wish I could be better on the numbers and how it's getting better. But I do feel like we AID are in a better place to start working on those.
Thank you. It is daunting, and we've spent a lot of today talking about, a backdrop to much of our conversation has been about the crisis in the world. And, Matt, there's not enough people and there's not enough money to meet the challenges. So tell us a little more about how does BHA, do you prioritize? Are you looking at new ways of working so that you can try to meet the challenges with the resources that you have?
Definitely, and I think it's something that we continue to do all the time. Our budgets change from a House vote to 1 year to everything else, and so we're continually having to do exactly that. And one thing that I won't go into detail on, but I think is very relevant, that tracks a lot what the agency's doing, and was, I think, what Dennis was talking about earlier, just about systems and processes and things internally. And there's big aid and how we do granting and award making and all of that. And relatively recently, BHA internally has really decided to kind of knock down the walls and take our grant making and award making down to its basics and to kind of start rebuilding that up. And I feel incumbent to say this out loud and publicly so you all can hold us to it, to actually trying to change some of those practices. But that is something, a very mechanic side of it, but I do see that actually having a lot of impact on how we go forward, which actually dovetails to many of the other big things that we are talking about, that being the localization of humanitarian assistance. And luckily for us, and I say that I think maybe a year and a half ago, 2 years ago, a little bit grudgingly, and now I'm kind of like a convert. This local idea, especially on the humanitarian side, was like, no, like we're too fast. We don't need to do that. But the administrator has been pretty relentless. Like, we're doing localization, y'all better jump on board. And I think it actually is changing a lot of how we mechanically do things, but also with our partners as well across the board. And so I think localization, like that idea of we're gonna have bigger impact, we're gonna actually save money, and we're gonna be able to even move faster in certain ways to do that. And I think the locally led humanitarian side was something that has been talked about for a long time. Again, I feel like we're actually internalizing that and getting that to be real. We're talking a little bit about HDP Nexus and the efforts from POL and other groups to be part of this. Again, another buzzword that's been talked around for a long time. I do like the P aspect of it. And I'm glad to see the peace building aspect being pulled more readily into this, because I think, again, I've been around long enough to know that the different sides of development and the emergency side, and we kind of like pointing fingers and everything. And that's okay. That should continue, and we should continue to see each other on different places if we were to segregate off to that kind of thing. But what it really does mean for us, and I think a sea change of like, we have a bigger role, we the humanitarian side. We can't just be over there not doing and not seeing what that impact is, because just as I said, the needs are growing. Bringing in that P aspect of it is a really good binding force. And this is just me as an operator talking. I'm not talking about the 17 papers that are out there. But I actually see that really happening within USAID through the poll. And I see it on the BHA side a little bit better participation in this than we have at both like on the mission level, but also with our partners all across the board. And I am positive that will continue as we go forward. I think, they're beyond the locally led in the nexus. I think what we are trying to do with, and I'm going to use another buzzword that I'm sure Dennis threw out. We couldn't hear exactly what Dennis was saying. I was like, God, I hope I don't say anything that he doesn't, But the idea of progress without programs. And again, it is a buzz thing around, but in actuality, we, the humanitarian side, have not flexed into that enough on like how we can re-bring our skills of convening and actually having that impact without just the programs and throwing the dollars at it, but flexing as the humanitarian community to bring those tables together. And I think we're seeing that a lot on the private sector engagement. We're seeing that a lot with the dovetailing, which we wouldn't even talked about this before, but the ongoing the multilateral bank, World Bank engagement. Mm-hmm. Now we're part of that. Like we are right on that team with Cheryl and crew, and it's important because we want those bank guys to be doing stuff in different areas in a little bit that's going to have impact on the humanitarian side. And I really do think that is what the agency is moving forward. And unlike before, I can say I was kicking around. We're not just sheltering the humanitarians in the corner. We want to go play, and we see a role there. And I think that we're going to be seeing that moving forward. So I do, just to end on one sentence, I think it's a much, what we're seeing in BHA and USAID, I think is, yes, the humanitarian, unfortunately, side of this is going to continue. But instead of just sectioning ourselves off and pretending that we don't have more of a role, let's actually more readily engage. Let's build BHA. Let's get it to where a place where we can do that in a better way. And I think no other time than now, what we're seeing, it really does call for that. And I think with leadership before, with Sonali as we go forward, it's actually becoming more of our DNA.
That's great. Thank you. I'm going to turn to localization in a minute, actually, but I wanted to ask you, Michelle, a hard budget question first. You've got resource management now in your bureau, so I think you're fair game. So last month, Congress finally passed an appropriation, right, for the agency. For understandable reasons, humanitarian assistance funding went up, but global health, development assistance, economic support funds all went down. Is that the world we live in now, where there's a trade-off between humanitarian assistance and development assistance? What are your views on sort of the balance between those two?
Well, let me just say a couple things. This is a very fair question, and I was like, I wonder if I'll skip it since we're running late. But what I would say is that, I think we have to wait and see. Like last year, we spent over $70 billion on development and humanitarian and health programming. We were never going to maintain those levels. And if you look around the world, many of our G7 donors and other like-minded donors are also seeing the pressure. The world is changing, and I think we're all going to face some hard choices. I think that, I'm not sure it's a trade-off. I mean, I think as Matt was saying, what we're trying to do is really understand where is the connection between the humanitarian funding and the development funding? And in some ways, I see it as an opportunity, and I know that sounds very trite, but I seriously do. I think it's an opportunity, one, to really think about a lot of the programs we've been doing for many, many years, decades, and think about how do they need to be adjusted, how should they be done differently to meet the needs of today, and how can we make this connection between the humanitarian and development funding? For many years, we haven't had to do that because both have been very, very well funded. I think the other thing that it's forcing us to do across all of the like-minded donors is really think about how do we become more harmonized at the country level, which I think will be much appreciated by our countries, the countries where we work. So for example, we have been working very closely with Ireland to think about how can we work together on agriculture programs in Zambia. We were never forced to do that kind of thinking before, but now we're all trying to figure out how can we leverage each other's resources and get a bigger outcome. Last year in October, we hosted a trilateral conference with Japan and Korea, thinking about what are the new ways that we all can be working. And now we're trying to figure out, we're doing a global health security program in Ghana where Korea's funding this piece, we're funding that piece, and Japan's funding this piece. So it's really, I think, going to be beneficial at the country level, but also beneficial for us to really think about what is our added advantage in these conversations. So I think I have avoided your question as much as I possibly could, but I think it is going to force us to act and be different, and I'm hopeful that next year, with a lot of advocacy that I'm not asking you all to do, that perhaps we'll see different numbers in the appropriations bill.
Okay, we didn't hear you.
No, I know it's on C-SPAN, so
Yeah.
hopefully there's evidence.
All right, I am being given the high sign. So we started late, and we don't want to keep people too long on a Friday afternoon. So we're going to move to the lightning round now.
Okay.
So I have just two quick things I want to ask you about. I was going to ask each of you to comment. I'm not going to do that this time, but I did want to touch on locally led development and also on artificial intelligence, because it's those. That both of them actually have been a very large subject of discussion today. So which one of you wants to talk about localization? Because what I'd like to know is the administrator set out very ambitious targets. The agency is having trouble meeting them for reasons that we understand. Can you just talk a little bit about what the challenges are and you know how the agency is trying to address them? Is that for who?
I'm
For
happy to
Michelle?
take the general localization, and you can do a couple
And
sentences
the
on
key
each.
here is
Okay.
quick and brilliant,
Got it.
radiant and celestial.
Do you want me to start?
Well, yes,
want-
and then
Cheryl's gonna
for
do AI.
Cheryl, we've talked a lot about artificial intelligence today,
Mm-hmm.
and people are excited about it. People are nervous about it. If you could just say from the agency's perspective quickly, and this is not fair, I know, but sort of what do you see as the positives, and then maybe what are you worried about? Are there some guardrails that need to be established? Are there things that you as an agency and we as a community need to be working on together to make sure we don't do this wrong?
I'll chat GBT the answer to that
Okay,
one.
you work on
Well,
that. So, Michelle, on
So
localization.
let me just go, I have a couple of high points on localization that I'm going to hand it to Matt. First thing I'm going to say is that the administrator believes very firmly that we should be working with local organizations, international NGOs, multilaterals, et cetera. It's an ecosystem that we all exist in. So when she sets a target of 25% for local organizations, that means 75% continues to go to the partners in this room and outside this room. So first of all, that's the first thing. The second thing is that we did this differently than we did USAID Forward. We set up a task force that is IPI, PLR, and M Bureau. And we said, what do we need to do to change ourselves as an agency? How do we make things easier for our local partners to partner with us? And what do we have to give to our staff so they can do this better? So we did everything from changing the risk management statement to new tools, to new ways of learning. We've partnered with new folks. We have 3 new MOUs with Hewlett, Hilton, and the Skoll Foundation to bring in new and different kinds of partners. We actually collaborated with the interagency to change the code of federal regulations that guide how we do assistance awards. That was a huge difference in terms of what will be needed. So I guess what I would say is this is something that we are committed to, and we're going to be doing direct local funding, but we're also going to be looking at how we do our work. And I think maybe that's a good handoff to Matt. We have an estimate of 50% of our programs will work very closely with local partners through the development, the implementation, and the evaluation of our programs. And I think that really gives us new tools and new ways of working. So over to you.
That was excellent. And I think just quickly, like obviously with the humanitarian side, we could have maybe thrown a flag and said, look, that's just not going to work. You don't want us to do this, or even tried to use some things. I think that the administrator would have said no regardless. But instead of doing that, we actually went just as you said. We did the exact same thing that Michelle, that you were talking about. Like, okay, let's start consulting with our partners, especially our field side. And there is a massive desire to do this, first of all. And I can honestly say I don't think it might have been there before. And so with that desire is, okay, what do we do differently? And it's exactly that. Like we're hiring translating services. We are paving the way to like actually have a capacity building crew that just works with local guys to be able to get through our morass of awards. And now we've got the whole agency working on this together to actually make that whole process easier, specifically designed to get those local groups on board. Like I say, something changed in the DNA of like how we're going to respond there. So not only that, we're also pushing hard into the disaster risk reduction. So that is like a thousand flowers blooming type of thing. We have solid partners through other partners that we are now going directly to do exactly those type of things that they've been doing and getting paid by 3 or 4 different layers. But now we are working with them directly in over half a dozen countries now. We've got over $60 million with local organizations themselves directly to work on the disaster risk reduction beyond just Red Cross, actually community-driven type of things to build that capacity both at those local levels, hyper-local, as well as even filtering up to nationwide response apparatuses. So this is something that we're all in on, and I think that it's going to have that impact. And I agree, like, percentages and targets and numbers are important to animate it, but I think what also is important is that change of, okay, crusties like me, like who've been a bureaucrat for a long time, do you really believe in this? And I think that, yeah, we actually do this time around, and the holdouts of the baby savers and all this kind of stuff are actually on board too. And again, we've been working almost now 2 years on our own humanitarian localization policy that is going to be coming out, obviously for the agency, but really for all of our partners as well. And as just one of the indicators when I was growing up, we rarely, if ever, did anything about a pooled fund. Like AID money wouldn't go to a pooled country fund. But the country funds actually have some pretty good local contacts and actually are able to do this and do a lot of that vetting. BHA last year did more money into pooled funds than we've ever done in our history. And I think that that's a barometer of how we're taking this seriously.
Okay, thank you. So Cheryl, bring us home with something quick and smart about AI.
Okay. Well, I was going to mention, forget the opportunities on digital, things that we're worrying. Certainly, we are worried about cybersecurity practices across our programs. It's an area of practice we're trying to do more on, and we do have a major initiative on that. On the AI side specifically, we of course, see opportunities as well as risks. We really want to focus on having more impact on the responsible use of AI, and we see this as a point in time that there is an opportunity to do that. So we're very concerned about AI and how it can be used. That is going to, for example, roll back some of the gender equity things we're looking at. We certainly think AI can be used to undermine the relevance of women's experience on, resumes or credit ratings between men and women. So we're very concerned about that. We have a responsible AI challenge that we're funding to look at crowdsourcing different solutions to that. We also have a joint partnership looking at responsible AI in Africa with the Canadians, the Brits, the Germans, and the Gates Foundation. Really focused on that very much. And then there's several things that the U.S. government is also doing to really, at this point in time, how do we look at opportunities? We're working, there's a new executive order out from the White House. We've already put an AI action plan into place. We're looking at more responsible use of AI in our programs. We're looking at protecting digital ecosystems among our partner countries. And we're really training many, many more people in the responsible use of AI. We've already trained 550 USAID staff in this, and it's an area that demand exceeds the availability. So I'm not going to say more unless you want me to, because I can tell.
I do want you to, but they will get a hook and pull us off the stage. So thank you to the three of you. You all make me proud to have worked at USAID, and we're really glad that you were here. So I think with that, I said at the beginning of the day that Gloria Steele was an animating force behind this entire conference. She was the conference chair. She's going to close us out, I guess, with just a quick closing remark and one final video. So thank you all again.
Thank you.
Thank you, Wade, Michelle, Cheryl, and Matt. Thank you so much for coming and for sharing your views with us of your picture. We've come to the end of this conference. I can't believe it's all over, Mark. After meeting every week for the last 4 months, this is it. And on behalf of the Planning Committee, I would like to thank all of you for being here with us today, and to our sponsors for the support that you have given us. We hope that you found the events of today worthwhile, meaningful, and that they spark hope and optimism for the future. I'd like to invite you all to the reception, but before you go, we have one last lightning talk contest winner, and this is a very interesting one. It's called Preschool Entitlement, and talks about the hope for the future, our children, and something that's often overlooked or misunderstood, and the way around it. It's very interesting. I hope you enjoy it. It's for 3 minutes, and I ask you to watch it and then join us for the reception. And once again, on behalf of the Planning Committee, thank you all very much for being with us the whole day. Thank you. Good night.
Hello, my name is Jan van Ravens. I'm a policymaker. And that is a kindergarten. And this is also a kindergarten. These are children in Kyrgyzstan, Central Asia. They belong to a group of semi-nomadic people. In the winter they live in the valley, and in the spring they move up the mountains with the cattle. Now, these children cannot commute on a daily basis to a kindergarten down in the valley, so the kindergarten travels with them. And as you can see, they play in the brightest sunlight. Kindergartens around the world are so diverse. The point is, young children should learn and develop in their own environment. And the benefits of preschool education are lifelong and substantial. For every dollar we invest, we get up to $17 in return. After preschool, children do better in school. They're healthier, they'll be more productive as workers. There's more economic growth, more tax revenue. There will be less crime, happier families, a more peaceful world. But the problem is, only 3 out of 5 children are in preschool in middle-income countries. Now, low-income countries, it's only 1 in 5. Now, many children of preschool age are in a primary school. That's not okay, but they are paid for by the governments. Many others are in an unregistered kindergarten. The quality is low, but they are paid for by their parents. 1 out of 5 children in the global south is in such a kindergarten, including a stunning 85% of all the children in some peri-urban settlements in Africa. Here's the plan: 3 hours per day, 5 days per week, 40 weeks per year. Let's provide 3 hours of preschool education per day throughout the year, for all, for free. This will cost only 0.2% of GDP in middle-income countries. In low-income countries, it's a little bit more difficult to finance it, but donors can step in. They'll get the biggest bang for the buck. 3 hours a day is sufficient for child development. And for the rest of the day, parents can take turns caring for the children, or they can hire somebody for a couple of hours. The classroom is already paid for, the toys are there, and the parents can involve community leaders, NGOs, trade unions and employers, faith-based organizations. It's an open system where all stakeholders can start a preschool group, provided they get an accreditation. You see, when the government guarantees those 3 hours, it will spark a whole chain reaction at the local level.